For more than a decade, he lived here, in the towers, in the penthouses, in the shadows between diplomacy and impunity. He had survived gang wars. He had survived an international manhunt. He had survived US government sanctions that put a $5 million price on information about his criminal empire. He had survived because Dubai let him. On April 15, 2026, Dubai police arrested an Irish national, a man they referred to publicly only as DJK, on foot of a warrant issued by Irish authorities. Within hours it was confirmed by Garda and by the cartel watchers who had been tracking this man for 30 years. DJK was Daniel John Kinahan, the boss of the Kinahan organized crime group, one of the most wanted men in Ireland, a man who had built his empire on cocaine, murder, and intimidation, and then tried to launder it all behind a boxing promotion company and a Dubai address. He was gone. To understand how a man ends up running one of Europe's most dangerous organized crime groups from a penthouse in Dubai, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to Dublin. You have to go back to Christy Kinahan Sr. Christy Kinahan Sr. was born in Dublin in 1957. By the time he was a young man, he had already established himself on the fringes of Ireland's criminal underworld, small-time dealing, petty crime, a man learning the architecture of a life outside the law. He was convicted in Ireland and Belgium. He was jailed. He used prison not as a deterrent, but as a classroom. By the time he got serious, he was operating across Europe, Spain, the Netherlands. He built connections with South American cocaine suppliers. He built a network that moved drugs through the continent like a business, because to him, that's exactly what it was. And then he had sons, Daniel and Christopher Jr., born into a world where the rules were already written, and none of them were legal. Daniel John Kinahan grew up, straddling two worlds. He had access to wealth, real wealth, the kind that comes from serious crime at serious scale. But he also had the hunger of a man who knew what it meant to want more. He watched his father build the machine. Then, slowly, methodically, he began to run it. By the time Daniel came into his own, the Kinahan organized crime group, the KOCG, was no longer just a Dublin gang. It was a multinational criminal enterprise operating across Ireland, the UK, Spain, the Netherlands, and beyond. The Kinahans moved their base of operations to Spain, specifically to the Marbella area, a stretch of southern Spanish coastline that had long served as a retirement home for British and Irish gangsters who believed the sun and the distance from home could insulate them from justice. For a while, they were right. The KOCG built its cocaine pipeline from South America through Spain and into Ireland and the UK. The money flowed, the empire expanded, and Daniel Kinahan, according to the US Treasury Department, who would later make his crimes a matter of international record, began running the day-to-day operations. He was not a foot soldier. He was not muscle. Daniel Kinahan was management. He was strategy. He was the man who decided who got the contracts, who got the money, and who got the consequences for crossing him. Those consequences were fatal. The Kinahan organized crime group built its fortune on one product, cocaine. Not street-level dealing, not the small-time end. The KOCG was an importer, a wholesaler, a logistics company. If you replaced shipping manifests with encrypted messages and replaced delivery drivers with professional criminals willing to kill, the organization sourced large quantities of cocaine directly from South American cartels. It moved the product through Spain, using the infrastructure Christy Sr. had built, and distributed it across Ireland and into the United Kingdom. According to US authorities, Daniel Kinahan was personally involved in organizing the supply chain. He wasn't just aware of it, he directed it. The money generated was enormous. Hundreds of millions of euros flowing through a network of shell companies, property investments, and legitimate-seeming business fronts. And here is where Daniel Kinahan showed something his father never quite managed: an eye for legitimacy as armor. In 2012, an organization called MGM, later renamed MTK Global, emerged as a boxing management company. On the surface, it was legitimate. It managed professional fighters. It had contracts. It had offices in Dublin, London, Las Vegas. But investigators in Ireland, the US, and elsewhere began to piece together a different picture. MTK Global, they alleged, was connected to the Kinahan cartel. A way to move money, a way to buy respectability, a way to put Daniel Kinahan in rooms with sports stars, promoters, and celebrities, and have none of them ask too many questions. The most high-profile association was with world heavyweight champion Tyson Fury, whose team worked with MTK. Fury would later say he was unaware of Kinahan's criminal background when the relationship began. But the photographs existed. The connection was documented. And when the US Treasury sanctioned Daniel Kinahan in April 2022, the boxing world had to reckon with what it had allowed into its orbit. Within days of the US sanctions being announced, MTK Global collapsed. Tyson Fury's promoter, Bob Arum, publicly distanced himself. The legitimacy facade, the one Daniel Kinahan had spent years constructing, crumbled. But by then, Kinahan had already moved the chess pieces again. He was in Dubai. The UAE, the United Arab Emirates, had for years operated as a jurisdiction where wealthy foreigners could live in extraordinary comfort with relatively little scrutiny. Dubai, in particular, had become a magnet for oligarchs, sanctioned business people, and organized crime figures from Europe, Russia, and beyond. Kinahan had been based there for over a decade. He had properties. He had connections. He moved freely, attended events, and, according to those who monitored him, continued to direct the operations of the KOCG from behind the glittering skyline. Ireland and the UK wanted him. The US wanted him. But wanting and having are two different things when the man you're chasing is living in a country that has no formal extradition relationship with any of them. Or so it seemed. If Daniel Kinahan's business empire was built on cocaine and shadow finance, his most visible legacy in Ireland is written in blood. 18 people dead. A gang war that paralyzed Dublin for years. And at the center of it, the feud between the Kinahan organized crime group and the Hutch family. The origins of the feud are disputed, as origins always are when the people who know the truth are either dead or refusing to talk. What is agreed upon is that tension between the two Dublin criminal factions escalated catastrophically in 2015 and exploded into open warfare the following year. On the 5th of February, 2016, gunmen disguised as Garda, Irish police, stormed the Regency Hotel in Dublin during a boxing weigh-in. They were hunting Kinahan associates. David Byrne, a Kinahan associate, was shot dead. 2 others were wounded. The response from the Kinahan side was swift and savage. 2 days later, on the 7th of February 2016, a man named Eddie Hutch Sr. was shot dead at his home on Poplar Row in Dublin's north inner city. Eddie Hutch was the brother of Jerry the Monk Hutch, who the Kinahans believed was behind the Regency attack. Eddie Hutch was a taxi driver. He had no criminal record. He was 55 years old. In the world of organized crime, killing an innocent man is not a mistake. It's a message. And the message the Kinahans sent with Eddie Hutch's murder was understood immediately. No one connected to the Hutch family was safe. The feud escalated. Murders continued on both sides. Dublin streets that had known violence before were now operating under something resembling a war footing. Innocent people lived in fear. Communities were terrorized. The Irish state mobilized in response with Operation Hybrid, a sustained Garda operation targeting both factions. Visual: map of Dublin. Murder locations marked one by one: Crumlin, Cloverhill, the North Inner City, Poplar Row, a constellation of violence. Music. Music grows heavier. The weight of 18 lives. By the time the feud's death toll hit double figures, the Kinahan cartel had firmly established itself as the primary target of Irish law enforcement, and increasingly of international agencies who understood that this was not a local gang war. This was an organized crime group with European reach, American connections, and diplomatic ambiguity protecting it at every turn. Daniel Kinahan's role in directing the feud, particularly in ordering or sanctioning the murder of Eddie Hutch, became central to the Irish state's case against him. Gerry Hutch himself was eventually charged with the murder of David Byrne at the Regency Hotel. In April 2023, after one of the longest and most complex trials in Irish legal history, he was acquitted. 3 jurors who sat on the trial later received death threats. The feud had long tentacles. It reached into courtrooms. It reached into jury boxes. It reached, prosecutors believed, all the way back to Dubai, to a man who was making decisions from behind a phone screen and a sea of sand. The murder of Eddie Hutch is one of the charges listed in the Irish arrest warrant issued for Daniel Kinahan. For the family of Eddie Hutch, a taxi driver, a brother, a man, who simply had the wrong surname, April 15th, 2026, was not just a news story. It was the beginning of the answer to a question they had been asking for 10 years. Dubai is a city designed to make you believe anything is possible, and to make sure you don't ask how. For the better part of 15 years, Daniel Kinahan made it his home. Not a bolt hole, not a temporary refuge, a permanent base from which, according to investigators, he continued to direct the operations of the KOCG as if the 1,000 miles of distance between him and Dublin were a kind of legal force field. The UAE had historically been reluctant to extradite individuals to European jurisdictions. It had no formal extradition treaty with Ireland at the time the KOCG first became a primary target. That gap, that legal grey space, was something Kinahan and his associates understood and exploited. In 2022, Irish investigators working with Interpol began the long, painstaking process of changing that reality. Ireland and the UAE negotiated a bilateral extradition agreement, a formal legal mechanism that would allow for the transfer of criminal suspects between the two countries. It was slow, it was diplomatic, and it was built, in large part, with one person in mind. While the diplomats worked, the investigators watched. Kinahan did not disappear from view. He attended events. He was photographed. He was seen. There were those who believed his continued visibility was itself a statement, proof that he believed the UAE would continue to protect him. He had reason to think so. The UAE had, for years, proved resistant to international pressure on the question of wealthy foreign nationals who had made the country their home. Dubai's reputation as a place where money could insulate you from accountability was not accidental. It was a feature. Investigators had mapped a network of properties in Dubai connected to Kinahan and his associates. Luxury apartments, business addresses, assets that told a story of permanence. A man who did not believe he was going anywhere. He was wrong. The Irish government, supported by An Garda Síochána, had been pursuing the legal and diplomatic pathways for years. They were patient, they were meticulous, and when the bilateral extradition agreement was in place, they did not rush. They waited. They built the case. And then they moved. On the 12th of April, 2022, the United States government did something that changed the nature of the game entirely. The US Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, imposed sanctions on Daniel Kinahan, his father Christie Sr., and other senior KOCG members. The sanctions were not symbolic. They were operational. Any person or entity doing business with Daniel Kinahan, anywhere in the world, was now exposed to US secondary sanctions. His assets could be frozen. His associates could be targeted. And every financial institution, every business partner, every boxing promoter who had been looking the other way was now on notice that the United States was watching. The US Treasury described Daniel Kinahan as playing an integral part in organizing the supply of drugs in Ireland and attempting to facilitate the importation of cocaine into the United Kingdom. They said he sourced large quantities directly from South America. They said he had used false identity documents. They said he had instructed KOCG members to send money to individuals serving prison sentences for murder and attempted murder on behalf of the organization. This was not the profile of a boxing promoter who happened to have a questionable background. This was the profile of an active criminal enterprise director, still running operations from behind his Dubai address. The effect of the sanctions on Kinahan's public profile was immediate and devastating. The legitimacy architecture he had spent years constructing collapsed within days. MTK. Global dissolved. Sponsors ran. Fighters quietly found new representation. But the man himself remained in Dubai, unbothered, untouched, at least for the moment. The US sanctions had done something else, though something less visible but more important. They had placed Kinahan formally into the category of international organized crime threat. They had made his criminal status a matter of American legal record, and they had sent a signal to the UAE and to the international community that allowing this man to continue operating from Dubai had a cost. The pressure was building, and the Irish state was about to use it. Before Daniel Kinahan could be arrested in Dubai, Ireland needed to know that the mechanism would actually work. They needed a test. They found it in Sean McGovern. Sean McGovern was one of the most senior figures in the Kinahan organized crime group. According to investigators, he was Daniel Kinahan's right-hand man, the operational layer between the boss and the people carrying out his instructions. McGovern had followed Kinahan to Dubai. He too had made the UAE his base, believing the same insulation would protect him. In April 2022, the same month as the US Treasury sanctions, the Irish High Court issued a European arrest warrant for McGovern, charging him with serious organized crime offences. The UAE did not act on that warrant immediately. The bilateral extradition mechanism between Ireland and the UAE was new, untested, and contested at every stage by McGovern's legal team. But the Irish government pressed ahead. A formal request from the Department of Justice to the UAE equivalent was issued. Interpol was engaged. The diplomatic work that had been laying the groundwork for years was now being called upon. McGovern fought it. He launched legal challenge after legal challenge in the Dubai courts. He spent 8 months in a Dubai prison while his lawyers worked every available avenue. Eventually, the challenges failed. Sean McGovern was extradited to Ireland. He arrived in Dublin in handcuffs. In November 2024, in the Special Criminal Court, a court designed specifically to handle serious organized crime cases in Ireland, Sean McGovern pleaded guilty. Gardaí were careful in how they described the significance of McGovern's extradition. They used the language of precedent, of test cases, of a mechanism being proven, because they had always known that McGovern was not the ultimate objective. McGovern was the rehearsal. Daniel Kinahan was the performance. With the McGovern extradition complete, Irish authorities had demonstrated something critical to their counterparts in Dubai. The process works. The legal framework holds. We will follow through. And now they turned their attention back to the man at the top. Building a criminal case against a man who has been living in a foreign country for over a decade, who has access to the best legal representation money can buy, who has spent his entire adult life understanding how the system works and how to stay one step ahead of it, is not a simple operation. It is a patient one. Irish investigators, working with Interpol, the UAE Ministry of Justice, and their counterparts in multiple jurisdictions, assembled the file. Every charge needed to be documented. Every piece of evidence needed to survive legal challenge. Every procedural step needed to be followed precisely, because this was a case that would be contested hard by a man with significant resources and significant motivation. The Irish government's relationship with UAE authorities had been carefully maintained at multiple levels, police to police, through the Ministry of Justice, through the Department of Foreign Affairs. The bilateral extradition agreement signed between the two countries was the legal bridge. But bridges don't build themselves, and this one had been constructed through years of sustained diplomatic effort. On April 15, 2026, the Irish authorities submitted their judicial file to Dubai's public prosecution. The file detailed Kinahan's alleged crimes, his involvement in international organized crime, his direction of the KOCG, his suspected role in the murder of Eddie Hutch. Dubai's public prosecution reviewed the file. They issued their own arrest warrant on the same day. Specialized teams were deployed immediately. Surveillance operations, tracking, the machinery of a modern police force, operating with urgency and with the advantage of knowing exactly where their target was. 48 hours after the warrant was issued, Daniel Kinahan was in custody. 48 hours after a decade of impunity, after 18 murders, after US sanctions and European arrest warrants and family members living in fear and communities terrorized and a feud that carved bloody lines through Dublin streets. 48 hours. Dubai police confirmed the arrest on April 17, 2026. In their official statement, they did not immediately name him. They used only his initials. DJK, an Irish national, a member of a gang involved in international criminal offenses in his home country. For those who had been following this case, for the investigators, the journalists, the families of victims, the communities who had lived under the shadow of the KOCG, 3 initials were enough. An Garda Síochána confirmed the arrest of an Irish national in the UAE, a male in his late 40s, arrested on foot of a warrant issued by Irish courts in relation to alleged serious organized crime offences. They described it as extremely important. Extremely important is, in the understated language of policing, close to extraordinary. For the Gardaí who had spent careers pursuing the KOCG, who had buried colleagues, killed in the line of duty, who had watched the feud unfold, who had seen witness after witness refuse to testify out of fear, this moment was not just operational, it was personal. Daniel Kinahan was, for the first time, in handcuffs. Dubai police confirmed that the arrest reflected their forces, quote, rapid response and operational readiness in handling international cases. They reaffirmed their commitment to supporting global efforts to combat organized crime, to pursuing internationally wanted individuals, to cooperation across borders. The language was formal, the message was clear, the fortress had fallen.
Secondly, the guaranteed conscience testimony evidence of bank robberies. Justice and protesters gather themselves back to today and today. 43-year-old
Arrest is not conviction. And if the McGovern case taught anyone anything, it taught them that Daniel Kinahan will fight extradition with every legal tool available to him. He has the resources, he has the legal team, and he has a personal stake in remaining in Dubai, or anywhere other than an Irish courtroom, that could not be higher. The extradition process will run through the UAE court system. Kinahan's lawyers will challenge it. They will cite due process, fair trial concerns, the nature of the evidence, the political dimensions of the case. Every argument available to them will be deployed. McGovern's extradition took 8 months from arrest to Ireland. Kinahan's case is more complex, more high-profile, and carries higher stakes. It could take longer, but the direction of travel has been established. If and when Kinahan lands on Irish soil, he will face the Special Criminal Court, a non-jury court designed precisely because of the KOCG's demonstrated capacity for jury intimidation. 3 judges will hear the evidence. The alleged murder of Eddie Hutch and the direction of a criminal gang are the charges that will be put before them. The families who have waited, the investigators who have worked, the prosecutors who have built the case, they will all wait a little longer. But they are waiting now with something they did not have before. Their man is in custody. History does not move in straight lines. Justice does not arrive on schedule. The story of the Kinahan organized crime group is not over. Cartels do not dissolve when their leaders are arrested. The machine keeps moving. Other hands take the wheel. But the man who ran the machine is in a cell in Dubai tonight, waiting for an extradition hearing. Eddie Hutch Sr. was 55 years old when he was shot dead in his home on Poplar Row on the 7th of February, 2016. He was a taxi driver. He had no criminal record. He was killed because of who his brother was. There are 17 other dead. There are families who never got their phone calls. There are children who grew up without fathers. There are communities that spent years living under siege. None of that is undone by an arrest. But an arrest is where accountability begins. For the Gardaí who made that promise, in press conferences, in courtrooms, in private briefings with terrified witnesses, April 15th, 2026 was proof that they meant it. For the investigators who spent years building the bilateral agreement, cultivating the Dubai relationship, assembling the file, and waiting for the moment to move. This is what patience looks like when it finally arrives. For Daniel Kinahan, the man who built a criminal empire from Dublin to Dubai, who believed distance was protection and money was immunity, the reckoning has begun. He is in custody. Ireland is waiting, and the streets of Dublin are watching.